Hello, you're watching Telecom TV. We are in not so sunny Barcelona at Mobile World Congress 2016. This is our first major panel discussion of the day. It's going to be on Telco Cloud, and I'm joined by three guests, as you can see. On my right is Michael Fitzgerald, who is VP Global Industry Practice at the CME division of Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Next to him is Philip Laidler, who is Partner and Consulting Director at STL Partners. And last but by no means least, at the end there, is Thekkedath, who is Director of Marketing Communication Solutions at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Gentlemen, that's quite a mouthful to get out all at one go, but it's done, and welcome, and thanks for talking to us. First question really on the Telco Cloud is to you, Philip, and it's as simple as this. What is it? What is the Telco Cloud?
Telco Cloud, we use the term to describe a lot more than just network virtualization. So when people hear the term Telco Cloud, they tend to think of it as network virtualization, software-defined networking, perhaps some virtualization of OSS, BSS, maybe some virtualized distributed compute. It is that, but we see it as a lot more. We see it as the adoption of cloud business practices, cloud platforms, and cloud integration fabric that really helps enable a fundamental transformation of the business. And whereas the virtualization piece helps to deliver cost savings, we also believe that if you can adopt these business practices and these platforms, you can put into place the kind of capabilities and partnerships and ecosystems and innovation that will deliver new revenue growth. So for us, the Telco Cloud is the whole thing.
Okay, that's a good description. Let's move on. Michael, question for you now. Where is the focus of the industry when it comes to the economics of the Telco Cloud? Is it cost savings, or is it new revenues? Is it a balance between the two, or is it something completely different?
It's all of those things. At one end of the spectrum, clearly, as we've seen recently, up to 95% drops in price points for broadband, tenfold increases in capacity. There's an economic dividend to be gained from much smarter networks, much more virtualization, but we're seeing that at less than 20%. So the gain is we're slightly better. Let's see what happens. So that's one end of the scale. The other end of the scale is, as Philip said, it's around adoption of more agile ways of working, more innovation, getting things to market quicker and in a way that is first. So they're not fast followers anymore, they're first to market with new ideas and seizing the opportunity for growth. So it's both ends of the spectrum.
Okay, thank you. Bala, a lot of talk obviously about the new services that the Telco Cloud can bring. What kind of these new services do you envisage as being the first? How will they spread? How do you categorize them?
So the new revenues, when it comes to new revenue opportunities that are enabled by transformation in the CSP infrastructure and operations, we can actually categorize them into three main types of new services. The first one is what we can categorize as connect-oriented services. These are much closer to the core business of the CSP. So they have to do with, they center around the connectivity business. So it could be the ability to slice off a portion of their network so that they can spin off a complete true MVNO operations for large enterprises or emergency services. It could be as simple as just making sure that connectivity can be provided on demand, bandwidth can be provided on demand, SLAs can be changed on demand. So these are all services that can be categorized as centering around the core connectivity business. The second category of services actually we can categorize as perform, and this has to do with ensuring that content can be delivered, applications can be delivered with much better performance. So they combine connectivity and something else to create new services. So it could be bundling of applications, productivity applications to the connectivity and creating a combined offer. It could be ensuring that there's a good content delivery network that can be optimized by using the underlying changes in the infrastructure to be much programmable, much more cloudified. It could be just delivering applications better. So these categorize into the field of combining connectivity and applications and ensuring a better delivery of those. The third category is much more cutting edge. It includes the use of cloud-based technologies at the edge of the network, so you can capture data as they come in from the endpoints. Everything is connected. There's a lot of data that is being put back into the network. So there are a lot of services that can be imagined around taking that data at the edge, analyzing it, and pushing it back or distributing it to where it needs to go. It could just be using that as a control point for a lot of the traffic that is coming in and preventing it from flooding the rest of the network. So there are optimization solutions, and there are new types of services that can be delivered using the ability at the edge of the network to capture, analyze, and control data. And very typical examples would be using the edge of the network as a control point for a lot of the IoT data that is coming in, and using that as a control point for optimizing the way IoT traffic is distributed within the network, where it needs to go, depending on what entity needs to analyze what part to be transformed. So there are three major categories that we can look into. I mean, there's no hard and fast rule on how we do it. It was just an easy way of categorizing services.
Thank you. We touched on very briefly the new revenue as a concept of monetization and so on. Philip, of the new services we've just heard discussed and the myriad of others that must be out there or will be out there, which do you think has the most revenue potential?
I think it's really a question of timing, Martin. Right now, a lot of operators are already doing the connect, the first part. They're doing that through bandwidth on demand. We would argue that VCPE services fall into that category, and that's happening. That's already happening today, and that's where we think most operators will focus their initial activities and their rollout and deployments. The second category, it's clearer what the opportunity is. It's well defined. It's building on the back of existing practices, but there's less actually out there today. So these are application delivery networks, or accelerating the delivery of applications, accelerating the delivery of content. Some of the ecosystems exist already, some of the services all exist already, but we expect to see more of that coming into play, particularly as we see a further explosion of video content and some emerging applications that are more immersive. So cloud gaming, for example, or real-time video streaming, high-definition video streaming, and these experiences will require a lot more distributed capability. The third category, to be honest, it's a little bit out there. We know that the Internet of Things and the growth in devices and the capabilities required to support those are being defined largely under a 5G umbrella, and that's really when that will come into play. So I think actually that's the biggest potential in the longer term, and likewise there's a medium-sized potential related to perform, and the short-term potential will be really around connect.
Interesting. Okay.
Michael, I have Michael or Philip, either of you can answer. In terms of the actual numbers, how much of a revenue growth are we talking about here with these three types of services?
So we've just undertaken a modelling exercise with HPE, which is why Bala's asking me the question. Right. And our initial findings are, we think that you can make a case for just shy of a 10% increase in the base case revenue if you were successful in implementing Telco Cloud. This is not just about NFC, FDN, SDN, NFV. It's really about adopting those new business practices, putting in place that integration fabric, and changing the way that you work as an organisation. So it is a big transformation to step up to, but we think that those who could do it, should have those kind of potential uplift in their sights.
And there is one other point: is the monetizing shadow traffic, call it if you like that, the Netflix of this world, and the Ubers and all the other parties who actually leverage network to create new sources of revenue in different businesses. They've not been taken into context with the overall revenue opportunity for this sector, and actually that might be something that does evolve over the next few years as telcos get a little bit smarter at mimicking those models and adopting those practices. Exactly,
and actually paradoxically we believe that if operators can get smarter at innovating within their core, they would also get smarter at innovating around what they have termed OTT. And the model actually includes a slug of revenue associated with that form of what we call agility innovation. But we'll be publishing this with HPE in the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks, and then they'll have a lot of the detail be available then in that report.
Right, thank you. That's interesting stuff, and the opportunities are evident. We're not exactly certain what size they may be yet, or what surprises may come. But what we do want to know is, what about implementing these, Bala? What of these things we've been discussing, which of them is the easiest to implement, do you think, and the quickest? Is that a quick win and quick money, or what?
I think it goes back to the way Philip answered, right? It actually mirrors the revenue potential. The shorter term revenue potential, like Philip said, was from the connectivity services. And that is probably the easiest to implement for CSPs today, because it is within their core competence domain of managing a network. It has to do with connectivity. The changes that are required to carve out new services from this core connectivity services are much easier to implement. So once you have an infrastructure that allows you to program it in real time to offer bandwidth on demand, it's much easier to offer that as a service, because it's still a connectivity offering. It's just a different way of delivering that service, and a different audience that might be interested in a broader market that can be addressed based on that services. So that's the easiest one to implement. The second part were the second type of services which have to do with bundling applications and content along with the connectivity. That requires a change in it's not just networking, it's not just the infrastructure. It needs a new way of looking at the business models and the partnership approach. There are much more people involved in delivering that service to the end user. So that's a little bit harder to implement than the core connectivity services. And the third category of services, where you're capturing, analyzing, and controlling data at the edge of the network, that is a new paradigm. That has linkages to the industry, to the community, to models of engagement with not just partners. It's a broader ecosystem that has to be built around it. And the way it might be implemented, it could be shared between CSPs. There are many different models in which those services can be planned out. So those will be harder to implement. It's fairly new for the CSPs. It will be new for the end user consumers to see those kind of services as well.
Thank you. Philip, you were nodding in agreement when we were talking about business models there. What's your take on that? Are the business models changing? Are service providers and telcos aware that the business models are changing and have to change? And are they actually accepting of it, or are they fighting it?
No, I mean, we at Telco have been talking about this for the best part of 10 years, so it's an old topic for us. We actually think that there's a lot more sensible maturity and understanding about what this change means. And we do actually think that the arrival of more virtualized, more programmable, a lot more flexible infrastructure offers a real opportunity for operators to embrace new business models in a way that, frankly, they've struggled in the past. And we do see this as a big opportunity. They could, you do have to put more on top of it. You have to invest more on top of your network, to exploit that flexibility and that agility. Otherwise, you won't get it. So there is a risk that operators simply continue to work the way they've been doing, and that would be a missed opportunity. There's no guarantee here. We've got to take this thing forward and in new ways. But I think there is increasing awareness of and realism around A, the need, and B, the ability to step up to that change. Not all operators, and not all will want to, and not all will succeed, those who want to, but I think some will.
Those that do want to, and there's a lot of emphasis on the growth and maturing of ecosystems at the moment, and everything, it seems, has an ecosystem, particularly in cloud and in NFV and SDN and so on. How do you find it, let's say within HP Enterprise, the partnering, the collaboration within the ecosystem, how is it changing as a result of cloudification and the Telco Cloud? Is there something you can sort of put your finger on and say, yes, we know this is having effects on the service providers, the operators, because something?
Well, the OTT question is the one that keeps coming back up, as though it was somehow separate from the real world of telcos.
Yeah.
When actually they're just eating their lunch. They're taking revenues which they would love to get. So I think that the market, if you like, is forcing the dynamic anyway. The thing that Philip talked about in terms of the realisation that new models are important, partnering is important. I mean, just take the attributes of a telecommunications provider versus a digital service provider. Traditionally they've got long product cycles versus short, sharp ones. They've got a fixation with IP ownership versus co-creation and collaboration. They have functional silos versus agile ways of working. I think that those that break through that, we call it earlier the telco glass ceiling, they break through that model and start to behave like the people that they want to beat. That's when we'll see some breakthrough opportunities. And that ecosystem isn't just telcos, it's ISVs, it's application developers, it's different go-to-market models, completely different services in new industries. So that is starting to happen.
The OTT players are hardly new anymore. They've been around a long time. They've grown up now. They know what they're doing.
Yep.
And yet there doesn't seem to have been any coherent strategic response to them in many cases. Do you agree with that? Do you think that what it strikes me from what I read and the people that I talk to, particularly in some of the big service providers, they're very often, even today, still in denial about it. And they would like to have the revenues and they would like to be able to do this, and they're hoping that Telco Cloud and SDN and NFE in particular will help them to do so, but I don't see much sign of the urgency that you might have expected them to have given the circumstances.
One source of urgency is many operators are now seeing revenues declining or stagnant, and that's true now for more and more regions, whereas before it was primarily in Europe and other regions were still enjoying significant growth. What we're now seeing is an expectation of more stagnant overall revenues. Admittedly, more and more data, but less and less voice. And also, operators are aware that they are becoming commoditized. They are losing the kind of services that are more personal, more engaged, such as voice and messaging, are less and less part of what people are buying from them. They're just buying connectivity. So I think for some of them, that set the alarm bells ringing. They are conscious of the direction that's going, and they are responding. OTT is a love-hate relationship, operations and OTT. We talk about OTT, but actually OTT has driven a lot of the underlying demand that's been great business for operators. And so, I think this view of there being conflict is misleading. There could be more cooperation, and I think operators could do more for the OTTs and get rewarded for it. I also think that, there are a handful of big guys, and we know who we're talking about, but there are also thousands of smaller ones, all up for doing business, all up for working. And even things like mobile advertising, yes, Facebook, Google will dominate, but it's not wrapped up. There's opportunities in there for operators to take part too. And all the way across the board, there's lots of smaller OTTs who will be a lot more willing to work with operators. And I think that's where operators need to look and partner.
Bala, from your point of view, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons there hasn't been a cohesive response to this influx of traffic from over-the-top players is that CSPs today, unless they have transformed at least some part of the infrastructure, the majority of what they have to offer is still connectivity services, and that's what these guys are consuming in a commodity fashion. Once you transform the infrastructure where you are able to take on some of those services, like offering platforms where the OTT player doesn't have to do some of this stuff. If they can offload those applications, if they have the infrastructure to make an offer beyond connectivity, they could. Right now it is limited to connectivity because that's the core offering that they're working with. So once the infrastructure is transformed where they could use either their capabilities to ensure that they can guarantee performance across the entire infrastructure layer in a much more granular way for a particular application or a particular subscriber, or just offer platforms where they could do some of this processing of subscriber data or handle billing relationships and things like that, they would. But to to date, it has not happened because the infrastructure and the capabilities don't exist in many cases.
We're running out of time. I'm going to ask Michael, starting with you, a final question, and then let's bat it through and see what happens. We're talking about new revenues. Where are the CSPs on their journey, on their quest for those new revenues, and what happens if they don't cloudify? Is it possible to get new revenues without the Telco Cloud?
So let's work backwards. I think, will they survive the shift in the economic viability if they don't cloudify? I don't believe so. The opportunities, I think, are the ones we've been talking about, the obvious operational savings and the incremental services, but there's also the acquisitions that these guys make and the impact of those acquisitions. Because here's something to think about. I buy a company that has a national presence, say in the US or in Europe, but has a global presence as a brand. I've just changed the brand proposition of my business, where being a platform provider is just part of it. And I think that's one of the interesting things to watch over the next 2 years. So I think that's where they are on the journey, getting to the point where, how can we make this work?
Philip?
I think there are scenarios you could envisage, and we've run them, where operator can just focus entirely on cost, and if they drive their costs down, arguably they could still see demand and growth and share if they did that in an extremely efficient way and just still selling connectivity. Personally, I think that's quite a dangerous scenario to pursue, and I think that operators that did that would struggle because they would fail to create any kind of differentiation. They fail to create any kind of capabilities to service this new demand. And I think there are some operators who will have a go, but I wouldn't fancy their chances. I think you've got to add more on top of what you're doing and do it in a smart way and work a lot more with a wider community and ecosystem. Become much more than dumb pipe.
The last words with you.
Yeah, I agree with what both Michael and Philip say. Going down the path of just cutting costs is not going to work out for everybody. So CSPs who have an ambition to go beyond being an utility provider and grow their top line, they have to look at new revenues. You can always cut to an extent, but then you have to grow at some point. And in order to get on that path to growing new services, one of the key requirements is to enhance the underlying capabilities of the infrastructure. So I think that's where the transformation to Telco Cloud really comes into picture, because that gives you new capabilities, and new capabilities, when you combine that with a transformation they would undergo in their processes, in their capabilities, in their organization, and the way they interact with the community at large, the industry at large, I think those will open up new revenue opportunities.
We're up against the buffers as far as time is concerned. We can talk for another 20 minutes, no doubt, but we've got to stop. So all I can say is, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.